So let's start off by looking at some of these universal questions. For example, why are my eyes blue? Why do I have brown hair? Why do I have these freckles that I don't like? Why do I have my dad's nose? All those sorts of things. So we're going to look at some of those things. We're also going to first start off with some of the more important questions like what is DNA? What is a gene and what is a chromosome exactly? These are terms that we've probably heard quite a bit before, but you might not truly understand what they are. And I think that that's important to understand before we go into learning more about human sexuality. So let's start off by just exploring. We're going to put yourself under a microscope virtually. And I want you to know that you're made up of about 40 trillion cells, according to the latest estimates by National Geographic. That's a lot. Now, each of your 40 trillion cells contains your entire genetic code, which is your DNA. And Discover magazine actually said that if you were to take all of your DNA and stretch it out, it would actually be more than 10 billion miles long. And that's long enough to go all the way to Pluto and back to Earth. So pretty long. We have a lot of genetic information. So let's look at what that is. Most people say DNA all the time and have no idea what it stands for. So wanted to start there. DNA actually stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Now you know why most people just stick with saying DNA. But each of your cell contains DNA. It lives in the nucleus of your cell. 50% of your DNA comes from mom and 50% from dad. Now, what the DNA is it's basically like an instruction manual for the cell. It's going to tell the cell what type of cell it needs to become, what it needs to do, its job, its function, and how different activities are going to occur within the cell, like manufacturing proteins and that sort of thing. Usually when we look at textbooks, we will see this familiar DNA double helix formation of DNA, which basically looks like a ladder that has just been twisted and twisted. Now, most of the time, your DNA is in a very long, stringy, stretched out form, and it's actually so thin that it is invisible even under a microscope. So this DNA is called the decondensed form. Now, you might have noticed too that this double helix formation is kind of familiar. It looks a little bit like a telephone cord, and there's actually a reason that I'm telling you this. It's not just a fun fact. The reason that I'm telling you this is because of how DNA gets packaged into your cells. So if you've ever had the pleasure or torture of having to manage with using one of these old-fashioned telephones, you'll know that a lot of times that phone cord is going to end up very tangled. So when we look at this tangled mess here, this is called a supercoil. Now, the reason that I'm telling you this is because our DNA does the same thing. It will continue to coil and tangle up in itself in a very specific way, and it's going to condense in what we call chromosomes. In humans, we have 23 distinct chromosomes. Now, supercoil might render ideas of, Wonder Woman and Superman, but unfortunately, it's not quite that cool. This type of supercoil does not fight crime or wear a cape or anything like that. But yeah. So what do your chromosomes actually look like? Well, this is a wonderful example because this is actually a photograph taken from an electron microscope of human chromosomes. So they really do have that characteristic X-shaped that we usually see in textbooks, which I think is very exciting. This particular photograph I found on Sci Blogs, and I have the link here if you would like to take a look at it and other wonderful photographs that they have there. Now, each of your cells has 46 chromosomes, 23 from your mom and 23 from your dad. Now, chromosomes are kind of cool. We can actually do certain things with them. Now, remember, most of the time your DNA is not in this condensed chromosomal form, but it is kind of cool to look at because remember, we can't really see DNA when it's not in its condensed form. So, this is what the chromosomes look like. And when we actually will pair these chromosomes up with one another, for example, we're going to take number 1 from mom, number 1 from dad, put them side by side, take number 2 from mom, number 2 from dad, put those side by side, so on and so forth. And when we do that, we get something called a karyotype. This is an example that's shown here of a human male karyotype. And these are kind of neat because not only does it give us a nice visualization, but we can also diagnose chromosomal abnormalities here as well. Now, you might have noticed something else that's kind of interesting. Uh, Chromosome number 23 looks a little bit different than everything else in this particular karyotype. Let's talk a little bit about why. Now, the 23rd chromosome is also known as your sex chromosome because this is the chromosome that determines whether you are genetically male or genetically female. Now, in order to be female, a female will have had to inherit 2 sex chromosomes that look like the letter X, as we see here. So that means a woman has to inherit an X from mom and an X from dad for that 23rd chromosome. Therefore, we say that females are XX. On the other hand, a male has inherited 2 sex chromosomes that look different from one another. One kind of looks like an X, the other kind of looks like a Y. For this reason, we say that males are XY. The male inherits the X chromosome from mom, and the Y chromosome always comes from the father. Let's look at why this is. So when looking at which parent dictates what the gender is, you might already know, but just in case you don't, let's walk through it real quickly. Now, your mom, since she was female, was XX. So since she is XX, that means when you get 50% of your DNA from her, she can only give you an X. She doesn't have anything else to give you. So whether you're male or female, you always have one X from your mother. Now, from your dad, it could go either way. So a sperm could be carrying an X or a Y chromosome for the sex chromosome. So this means that every single baby has a 50-50 chance of becoming male or female. It just depends on what is inside of that sperm when it fertilizes the egg. So basically it's the male. The father is the one that dictates whether the baby is genetically male or female. And this is just another cute little rendition. So a little bit of nomenclature here. If you have a single egg, we can also call that an ovum. If you have a bunch of eggs together, we would call that ova or OVA. Sperm, if you just have one sperm cell, we could call that a spermatozoon. If you have a lot of sperm, it would be spermatozoa. Now, I am making a big deal of sex here because, after all, this is a human sexuality class, but I want you to keep in mind, too, that there's a lot of other information in your chromosomes besides just determining your sex, of course. Now, when we say genes, a lot of times we'll say you've inherited this gene or that gene. These are not the type of genes that you buy at your local store or the mall. These are different genes. They're not spelled the same. So what a gene is a gene is actually defined as a a portion of the DNA within the chromosome that has a specific function. For example, you have genes that are for hair color and eye color, and genes that are for your blood type, and genes that are for other different characteristics. So that's what we mean by genes. For example, you could have inherited green eyes, red hair, and freckles, like my little cartoon drawing here that I thought was kind of cute. So you all started out as a fertilized egg. And somehow from that one little fertilized egg, you ended up being 40 trillion cells strong. Wow, that's a lot of growth. So when the egg and sperm join, they actually form a complete zygote, which has all the 46 chromosomes that you would expect. But in order for that to happen, something a little bit weird has to happen, because you have to have only half the number of chromosomes in the egg cell and the sperm cell as in any other cell to have this union make one whole entity that is correct. You don't want to have too many chromosomes. When you have too many chromosomes, it actually can cause chromosomal abnormalities, and you don't want that. So, all right. So there's two different categories of cells that I'm going to talk about now. When we talk about your sex cells, we're talking about your gametes. Okay, gametes is just another way of saying your sex cells or sperm cells and egg cells together. Somatic cells are basically your body cells. And when you look at the foundation for the root word of somatic cell, somatic or soma actually comes from the Greek word body, whereas gametes comes from the Greek word for to marry. So that kind of makes sense a little bit. Okay, so in your body cells actually undergo mitosis. So you start off with a parent cell that has the 46 chromosomes, and what happens is that genetic material is going to double. That's why you see these single strands becoming these X's. Now, once they become once that genetic material doubles so that the chromosomes are in that X form, that X form actually has two what we call sister chromatids. And those sister chromatids are going to go to opposite sides and eventually split off to form two separate cells. Now, mitosis is going on in your body all the time, not only for you to grow from the zygote to what you are now, but also to repair wounds and to replace old worn out cells. Now, in your gametes, something different happens. You have something called meiosis. Now, in meiosis, it's kind of like 2 rounds of mitosis, if you will. You still start off with just one parent cell, but this time something happens that's quite different. So that parent cell still has 23 chromosomes from mom, 23 from dad, but this time number 1 chromosome from mom and number 1 chromosome from dad are going to pair up, and they're going to lay on top of each other, and they're going to shuffle their genes. They're actually going to shuffle their genetic material and swap it between themselves. So you can think of it as like reshuffling a deck of cards. It's kind of what they do. So the genetic material gets all mixed up here, and it's really kind of cool. So the end result is that you're going to still have, you know, 2 number 1 chromosomes, one that was from mom and one that was from dad, but now you really can't tell which is which because they've all been shuffled together. So you end up with a bunch of weird hybrid stuff, which is awesome. So after that happens, those chromosomal homologs, that's what they call it when it's number 1 from mom, number 1 from dad, they're the same. So we call them homologous chromosomes. Those homologous chromosomes are going to then line up down the middle of the cell, as we see in this illustration here. And then they will be pulled to opposite sides of the cell, and then that cell is going to split into 2. Now, at this point, you have 2 separate cells, Each of those cells has chromosomes which are in the X shape, but you might notice here that you're only going to have 23 chromosomes at this point. Now, those 23 chromosomes have two sister chromatids, but and those 23 chromosomes are now a mixture of mom and dad. They're no longer just one or the other because they've been shuffled. That event, if you want to know, is called crossing over, by the way. So, once they split into two cells, they're basically going to split again. And this part looks a lot like mitosis. You're going to have the chromosomes line up in the middle, and the sister chromatids are going to go apart, and you're going to end up with four four cells that have just half the number of chromosomes of the parent cell. Also, it's very important to note that these are not clones. They're not they're not genetically identical to each other, and they're not genetically identical to the parent either. So, let's just look very quickly at the differences between mitosis and meiosis. Now, somatic cells or body cells undergo the type of cell division called mitosis, and gametes undergo meiosis. Mitosis creates from one parent cell, it creates two identical clones, which are genetically identical to each other, genetically identical to the parent cell, and they are, so you go from one cell to two daughter cells. Whereas in meiosis, you have one parent cell is going to eventually make four daughter cells. These four daughter cells are not clones of each other. They are not genetically identical. So this is where we get genetic variation. And I'm very happy that I don't look exactly like everybody else. Okay. Because meiosis creates cells that are destined to become gametes for reproductive cells, this reduction in chromosomal number is critical because without it, the union of two gametes during fertilization would result in offspring with twice the number of normal chromosomes. So, and that's a bad thing. That actually leads to chromosomal abnormalities. It's not a good thing.